Scuba diving has been around for a few generations now, and we've found our groove through a lot of trial and error and many dives. So everything from equipment to routines and practices have been rigorously tried and tested and polished to what scuba divers do and love today. But as with many things in life, when the next generation comes along and stands on the shoulders of giants, they like to change everything and, make it better. But what happens to the old dogs who are kind of stuck in their way and can't learn new tricks? If you live long enough to be an old scuba diver, then you're obviously doing something right, but should you change? You can normally pick out an old school diver on the boat because their mask looks like it was made in the same mould and plastic as a Sony Walkman, and their BCD, used to be black. But if my inner rescue diver kind of tells me to watch out for either him with the regulators that are older than I am, or the guy next to him pulling his computer out of the box it came in, I'm probably going to be swimming closer to the green guy, just in case. The old boy can probably look after himself. So, do old school scuba divers really know best? Do they? Gone are the days of Sea Hunt and Roger Moore as James Bond, and also fighting off sharks and other menacing scuba divers with knives the length of your arm. A giant dive knife looks cool, but to be honest, they are hugely impractical when it comes to modern, recreational, and even technical diving. My primary cutting device has a cutting edge about, half an inch long, and a blunt tip as well, because for me it's a tool used to cut through fishing lines and maybe some webbing, not to fight off the axis of eagle or bloodthirsty octopus.
Release the Kraken!
Modern cutting tools are just that, tools for a job, and most recreational divers only need a dive knife to cut through the odd fishing line. Manufacturers still make big dive knives, but these are made for cutting through ghost gear and more substantial lines. But if you're not diving to recover ghost gear or unfoul a prop, then stick to a compact dive knife so you don't hurt yourself or damage your own gear. Rare to see nowadays either a twin hose regulator outside of a rebreather or an old horse collar ABLJ BCD. So let's start off with the twin hose. So twin hose regulators are cool and quite practical in some ways because you just have one combined first and second stage behind you, so there are no bubbles in front of your face. But there's a reason why you don't see any modern manufacturers making any new twin hose regulators, and that's because they can be quite dangerous. If the mouthpiece on your modern second stage gets knocked out, no biggie, just pop it back in, push the purge button, and keep going. A twin hose will flood with water and need to be cleared on the kind of breath that you have left in your lungs, and after the dive you have a big corrugated, damp, moist hose that you've been breathing through, so if you don't properly clean that out, some nasty stuff is going to be growing inside of it ready for your next dive. A breath with some chew. ABLJs are next on the list, and these have one benefit over modern dive BCDs, and that's that they hold you in a face-up position on the surface when fully inflated. Handy if you're unconscious, but not so great for, normal diving. Again, nobody really makes anything like this anymore for a reason, so they're best left in the museums. I love a dive watch, I'm wearing one right now, but with the invention and availability of the modern dive computer, do we really need them still? Back in the day, you'd work out your decompression based on your elapsed dive time and your dive tables. I'll get onto those in a minute. So you kind of need a trusty timepiece to tell your dive time, and that's what the rotating bezel is actually for. But nowadays, your dive computer just works it all out for you, and it's kind of better because it's constantly working out your decompression and descent rates and all sorts of things, as all your dive watch does is kind of tick once every second. With this, I can kind of go both ways. Ultimately, no, you don't need an analog dive watch that only tells the time to go on a safe dive, but I am partial to an analog backup gauge. If your dive computer fails for any reason during a dive, and it's happened to me on 2 different occasions that I can think of, a timer is actually very useful to get yourself back safely and monitor your decompression. I'm kind of leaning towards the old school divers on this one. Dive tables, if you're a newish diver, then you may not have actually been exposed to actual dive tables that you can see and touch and learn to hate because your fancy dive computer just kind of does it all for you. Your dive tables are fairly rigid when it comes to modern diving. I had a student call me up once after they'd passed their test and they'd went on a dive trip. They did an hour-long dive with a maximum depth of 18 meters and it was off their dive table. The thing is that they didn't spend 60 minutes at 18 meters. They probably only spent about 10 meters at their maximum depth before shallowing up. We don't dive square profiles anymore on recreational dives, so dive tables are a bit of a waste of space. They are useful for some divers, so don't just recycle them, and they're a good visual aid as well for new divers to understand the concept of nitrogen loading, but for most recreational divers, I wouldn't bother bringing one with me on a dive. For a more serious deep dive, then sure, bring your tables along for backup and to arrange your stops, but for an hour-long 30-meter dive, just check the battery on your dive computer first and stick close to your buddy for backup. Most dive kit is made to last, and most of us would, kind of complain if it only lasted a year or two and then packed in. But just because something doesn't fall apart in 10 years doesn't mean that you don't need to upgrade every so often. Wetsuits are wonderful, but if you could compare your old wetsuit to when you very first bought it, the first thing that you'd notice, it would be the color. It's now a custom faded color, but more importantly, it's a very lot thinner than it used to be. And not just that, you're actually feeling the cold now that you're older. It's more that your 5mm wetsuit is probably now just a 3mm. Regulators are probably the very best piece of kit to age because the key parts are actually exchanged and swapped out every time you service them. So keep in mind though that the manufacturer, basically after the manufacturer discontinues a regulator, after 7 years, they don't actually have to keep manufacturing parts for it. So spares are going to be hard to come by the longer and longer you go. Dive computers age fairly well, but their algorithms inside them, not so much. Not a great deal has changed in recent years in decompression algorithms, but enough to send you back to the surface before the rest of the group because their algorithms have better bubble models built into them. So is there any antiquated dive gear that you still use or practices that you still do and feel a little, old hat? I mean, when was the last time you honestly did a full sorted descent or a stellar ascent? You don't need to go out and replace all of your dive kit every single year to stay up to date, although I think your local dive store may disagree with that, but it is worth keeping up with modern trends because they don't become trends if they're doing something wrong. Anyway, chat away in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out our t-shirt designs down below and hit that subscribe button as well if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and of course, safe diving. Social media, which is one of the largest cues for mental illnesses and issues, especially in younger people today, just doesn't matter whilst you're scuba diving. Sure, you can take some photos and videos for your Instagram, but you don't tend to get much reception out at sea, and you're usually wet anyway on a dive boat, so the phone just